Some motorcycles just don't make the cut in the American market. Whether it's outdated design, awkward performance, or poor timing, before you pick your next bike, watch this video. It could save you from making a costly mistake. Number 7. Suzuki Boulevard M109R Boss. At the heart of this machine sits a liquid-cooled, fuel-injected 1783 cubic centimeter V-twin engine, one of the most powerful ever built by a Japanese manufacturer. It pumps out 128 horsepower and 118 pound-feet of torque, delivering brutal acceleration that hits like a freight train. But that power isn't without a price. The throttle is twitchy, the clutch is heavy, and the overall delivery can feel unrefined, especially in stop-and-go traffic. For seasoned riders chasing raw muscle, it's a thrill, but for everyday cruising or long-haul touring, that aggressiveness wears thin fast. And yet, from the moment you look at it, subtlety was never part of the plan. With its stretched-out wheelbase, oversized rear tire, and intimidating silhouette, the M109R was clearly designed to dominate the boulevard and demand attention. In the early 2010s, it had a strong following, riders who loved its drag bike presence and unapologetic size. But over time, as rider preferences evolved and competitors added refinement, this bike stood still. Now it's fading from dealership floors, overshadowed by more balanced options that offer performance and comfort. Supporting that engine is a steel frame with a low-slung profile and massive 39-degree rake. The front suspension uses a 130mm inverted telescopic fork, while the rear features a preload adjustable link-type monoshock. The brakes are dual full-floating front discs with dual piston calipers and a single-disc rear setup. Weighing in at 764 pounds wet, it's not a light machine by any stretch. You feel every bit of that weight when maneuvering at low speeds or in parking lots, and the limited turning radius only adds to the bulk. Seat height comes in at 27.8 inches, which makes it accessible to a variety of riders, but the stretch to the bars and forward controls can be uncomfortable over long distances. Fuel capacity is 5.2 gallons, which seems generous until you realize how quickly this beast burns through fuel when pushed hard. In terms of electronics, there's very little to speak of. No ride modes, no traction control, and no advanced rider aids. The display is a split analog-digital unit that looks dated compared to modern competitors. And while that might appeal to purists, many riders today are looking for more functionality and comfort features, especially in the touring cruiser space. The riding position, while aggressive, doesn't offer the kind of long-haul comfort that riders expect when spending this kind of money. With a starting price of $15,599, it places itself dangerously close to better-equipped and more refined American alternatives. Bikes like the Fat Bob or Indian Chief Dark Horse offer similar muscle cruiser appeal, but come with more modern features, dealership support, and brand loyalty. That's where Suzuki struggles most: support and perception. Parts availability, limited accessories, and a shrinking dealer network have made ownership less attractive in recent years. From overpowered and overlooked to underpowered and overpriced, the next one could not even win over first-time buyers. After researching sales trends and consumer reports, it's clear that some of these bikes are on their way out. Like, if you were surprised by any of these models, comment below with your thoughts on which bike you think will be next to go, and subscribe for more in-depth insights into why certain bikes are quietly disappearing from American roads. Number 6. Kawasaki Vulcan S Cafe. Some motorcycles try to be everything at once and end up belonging nowhere. That's the story of the Vulcan S Cafe. Underneath its sleek paint and cafe-style visor lies a 649 cubic centimeter parallel twin engine derived from the Ninja 650 platform. It produces around 61 horsepower and 44 pound-feet of torque. On paper, those numbers suggest balance, enough power for highway cruising, yet tame enough for beginners. But in practice, the engine lacks the deep rumble and loping cadence cruiser riders expect. Instead, it revs like a mid-weight commuter, smooth but sterile. Riders coming from Harley-Davidson platforms often describe it as hollow, too clinical, too quiet, and too eager to play nice. Kawasaki clearly hoped to modernize the cruiser formula, blending sport bike responsiveness with traditional V-twin attitude. But the result was a motorcycle caught between identities. Cruiser riders didn't appreciate the lack of soul, and younger sport bike fans didn't find the excitement they were used to. The Vulcan S Cafe ended up stuck in the middle, failing to capture the imagination of either group. It had presence in the showroom with a matte tank, stripe detailing, and round headlight visor. But when it came time to ride, the promise of personality was nowhere to be found. From a design standpoint, the contradictions continued. Foot-forward pegs paired with upright handlebars created an awkward riding triangle that didn't suit long-haul comfort or aggressive handling. Riders expecting laid-back ergonomics felt perched and disconnected. Those who appreciated the cafe-inspired styling often walked away disappointed after the test ride. Even though the Vulcan S Cafe looked different from its standard sibling, it didn't feel different enough to justify its premium positioning. Technically, it sits on a diamond steel frame with a telescopic front fork and a rear offset monoshock adjustable for preload. Braking duties are handled by a single front disc and a matching rear disc, supported by a standard anti-lock braking system. The cast aluminum wheels measure 18 inches in the front and 17 inches in the rear, wrapped in street-friendly rubber. At 497 pounds wet, the bike is nimble for a cruiser. But that lightness also works against it on the highway, where it lacks the planted confidence and composure riders expect from something with cruiser proportions. Seat height measures a manageable 27.8 inches, which makes it approachable for shorter riders. But while the seat's height is accessible, its padding is minimal, and long rides quickly become a test of endurance. And despite the upright posture, wind protection from the small visor is virtually non-existent. Add in the narrow bars and stiff ergonomics, and the bike starts to feel less like a relaxed cruiser and more like a confused hybrid. Kawasaki did try to solve part of the problem with its Ergo Fit system, an adjustable configuration that allows riders to swap out foot pegs, handlebars, and seats to match their size. It's a clever idea and does help with fitment, but the issue with the Vulcan S Cafe was never just about dimensions, it was about character. And no amount of ergonomic adjustment could inject the kind of raw emotion or distinctive identity that riders crave in this category. With a starting price of $7,899, the Cafe Edition positioned itself as a stylish, more premium take on the Vulcan S. But for many riders, it didn't justify the added cost. And as other cruiser models double down on identity and rider experience, this one simply fades into the background. Real riders need real gear. We handpicked our top jackets, gloves, and tools. Check the links in the description before your next ride. Number 5. Honda Shadow Phantom. There was a time when this bike was one of the most trusted ways to get into V-twin power. At its core is a liquid-cooled single overhead camshaft V-twin engine displacing 745 cubic centimeters. It produces roughly 44 horsepower and 47 pound-feet of torque numbers that once sounded respectable but now feel underwhelming for a bike weighing in at 543 pounds wet. Paired with a 5-speed transmission and shaft drive, the engine delivers predictable low-end pull but struggles to keep up when the road opens up. The power is soft, the acceleration flat, and for many riders today, it simply lacks the punch they expect in this class. Back in its heyday, this was a go-to machine for riders seeking a stripped-down cruiser that didn't break the bank. It had the look, the name recognition, and enough torque to introduce new riders to the feel of a V-twin. But times have changed, and this platform hasn't kept up. What was once seen as minimalism now feels more like neglect. There's no traction control, no ride modes, and no digital interface, not even a proper fuel gauge on earlier models. While some trims added anti-lock braking in later years, it was too little, too late. In a market where even entry-level cruisers are getting smartphone integration and basic rider aids, this one stayed stuck in a time capsule. Styling is another area where the bike has shown its age. The blacked-out bobber look still has appeal, but the design hasn't evolved in over a decade. Meanwhile, competitors have refined their lines, upgraded materials, and blended retro aesthetics with modern functionality. This bike still looks decent parked on the curb, but once you fire it up, it becomes clear that little has changed. It's a cruiser frozen in time, relying too heavily on past reputation. The chassis is functional, but basic. Up front, it runs a standard telescopic fork with 4.6 inches of travel. In the rear, dual shocks offer just 3.5 inches and no adjustability. The ride is soft enough for cruising, but once the pavement turns rough, comfort fades quickly. Braking is handled by a single disc with a twin-piston caliper in the front and a rear drum brake. Yes, a drum brake, at a time when most cruisers have long since moved to dual discs or more advanced systems. It's a detail that reminds riders how long this bike has gone without meaningful upgrades. The ergonomics are relaxed with mid-mount pegs, a low seat height of 25.8 inches, and neutral bar positioning. For shorter riders, it's easy to handle. But on longer rides, the narrow saddle and cramped layout begin to wear thin, especially for taller riders. In its final production years, this bike carried a starting price of $7,999. And while that figure might have once represented great value, it now places the bike squarely in a class filled with faster, more comfortable, and better equipped options. What once served as a gateway cruiser is now more of a forgotten holdover, another machine that remained static while the world around it moved forward. Now let's turn to a Yamaha that looked like a Harley, but had none of the attitude American riders expected. Number 4. Yamaha Bolt RSpec. For riders who wanted a no-nonsense bobber-style cruiser with Japanese reliability, there was a time when this model looked like the perfect fit. Powering the Bolt RSpec is a 65-degree air-cooled V-twin engine with a displacement of 942 cubic centimeters. It produces 46 horsepower and 52 pound-feet of torque numbers that, on paper, sound fitting for a mid-sized cruiser. But on the road, the engine reveals its limits. Throttle response is soft, mid-range pull is flat, and highway overtakes feel drawn out and uncertain. It's a motor tuned for mellow rides, not muscle, and when you dress that engine in a bobber silhouette that suggests raw attitude, the mismatch becomes obvious. This bike entered the market with promise. Solo seat, upright drag bars, and a low-slung, compact stance that echoed American garage-built customs. The styling hit the right notes. Blacked-out hardware, exposed mechanicals, and just enough edge to feel rebellious without sacrificing Yamaha's dependable reputation. But that visual edge couldn't carry the entire experience. Cruiser riders, especially in the American market, expect 3 things: power, customization potential, and character. And as the miles rolled in, it became clear the Bolt delivered mostly on appearance, and not much else. The steel frame keeps things tight and maneuverable, but the suspension setup holds the bike back from being truly enjoyable. Up front are non-adjustable conventional forks. In the rear, twin piggyback shocks add some flair, but not much function. Travel is limited, and the rear end often feels stiff and jarring, especially on uneven roads. Riders have frequently reported bottoming out or being bounced off the seat over mild potholes. The seat height is just 27.2 inches, which is friendly for shorter riders, but the foot peg positioning and low-profile saddle make longer trips uncomfortable, particularly for taller riders who quickly feel cramped. Braking is managed by single hydraulic discs, both front and rear, and operated by 2-piston calipers. There's basic anti-lock braking system support, but nothing more. Braking performance is adequate for city use, but lacks the bite and modulation needed for confident highway stopping, especially compared to cruisers with twin front disc setups. At 542 pounds wet, the bike has some heft, and while it remains manageable at low speeds, the underwhelming engine performance means it never feels as responsive as riders expect. The power-to-weight ratio leaves little room for excitement, and that becomes a real issue when lined up against competitors in the same price bracket. Visually, it still holds its own. The design is clean, minimalist, and aggressive in all the right places. The RSpec trim adds a suede-textured seat, cast aluminum wheels, and contrast-stitched accents that elevate its curb appeal. But that's where the updates stop. The instrument cluster is bare bones, lacking modern tech like smartphone connectivity, fuel range indicators, or ride modes. Lighting is basic, with a round halogen headlamp that feels outdated against today's LED standards. And when competing bikes are adding digital displays and real-time diagnostics, this one starts to feel frozen in time. Priced at $8,799, the Bolt RSpec lands in direct competition with used Harley-Davidson Sportsters, Softails, and even some Indian Scout models, bikes with more torque, stronger aftermarket support, and more refined long-term ride quality. That's where the Bolt stumbled hardest, and now we reach a cruiser that promised sportiness but delivered confusion instead. Number 3. Suzuki Boulevard C90T. This is a motorcycle that aimed squarely at American cruiser fans seeking long-distance comfort, classic styling, and V-twin grunt. Powering the C90T is a liquid-cooled, fuel-injected V-twin engine displacing 1,463 cubic centimeters, producing 75 horsepower and 97 pound-feet of torque. Those numbers position it solidly in the heavyweight touring class. But the power delivery is dulled by the bike's sheer heft and tall gearing. Riders expecting that deep, instant surge of torque found themselves waiting. When fully loaded with gear and a passenger, the engine feels strained, especially on steep climbs or during passing maneuvers. It's a case of decent power being overwhelmed by poor weight distribution and lackluster throttle tuning. At first glance, it seemed like Suzuki had crafted a machine with all the right touring ingredients. The bike came equipped with full fenders, a large headlight nacelle, floorboards, leather-wrapped saddlebags, and a wide cushioned seat. The posture was laid back and inviting, and for a while it even gained traction with riders looking for a less expensive alternative to Harley-Davidson or Indian. But when it came to execution, the cracks started to show. In a segment where comfort, control, and character matter, the C90T delivered the basics, but not much more. The full spec sheet explains a lot of the shortcomings. Tipping the scales at a hefty 847 pounds wet, this is a serious machine to manage, especially without the aid of advanced rider tech. The suspension setup is surprisingly limited. Up front, a telescopic fork with just 1.6 inches of travel. In the rear, a hidden link-type shock offering 4.3 inches of movement. That's barely enough to soak up highway imperfections, let alone deliver a plush touring experience. Braking includes dual front discs with twin-piston calipers and a single rear disc with a single piston unit. Anti-lock braking system was not standard across all trims, which put the bike behind many competitors when it came to safety. While it made the right gestures toward touring function, most of those features felt underdeveloped. The saddlebags are semi-rigid and weather-resistant, but they aren't lockable or particularly spacious. The fixed windscreen causes noticeable buffeting at highway speeds, especially for taller riders, and the plush seat tends to compress after an hour or two, losing much of its early comfort. There are no ride modes, no cruise control, and no infotainment system. Design-wise, it tried to blend retro touring cues with Boulevard cruiser attitude. There's no shortage of chrome, lining the tank, pipes, and side panels, and the fenders are deeply valenced to deliver that classic silhouette. But parked next to more refined offerings from Harley or Indian, the C90T can feel busy and unfocused. Some riders did appreciate its relaxed ergonomics and slow-speed stability, but that comfort quickly eroded over longer rides due to harsh rear suspension feedback and limited travel. At a starting price of $11,299, the C90T undercuts premium touring bikes, at least at first glance. But the savings don't justify the trade-offs. For similar money, riders can often pick up a better-equipped pre-owned Harley with more torque, stronger dealer support, and a well-established community. In the end, the C90T became a quiet presence on the showroom floor, neither bold enough to lead nor refined enough to follow. From heavy touring to middleweight mediocrity, the next bike proves that badge alone doesn't sell anymore. Number 2. Honda CTX 700ND CT. It arrived with sleek, low-slung lines and promised to redefine what a cruiser could be in a modern world. At its core is a 670 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled parallel twin engine producing 51 horsepower and 46 pound-feet of torque. That power is delivered through Honda's automatic dual-clutch transmission, known as DCT, removing the need for a clutch lever or foot shifter entirely. For many cruiser fans, that was the first strike. The second came with how the engine felt on the road. It was quiet, muted, and more efficient than engaging. Instead of torque-driven pull and a roaring exhaust, riders got a smooth, subdued hum. In a platform shaped like a cruiser, that lack of emotional response created an instant disconnect. The idea behind the CTX 700N sounded bold on paper. Combine cruiser ergonomics with commuter practicality and modern tech. But in trying to blend too many identities, the result appealed to very few. Traditional riders who grew up on V-twins and steel fenders found little to connect with in the plastic bodywork and digital dash. Meanwhile, new riders expecting an easygoing yet stylish entry into motorcycling often walked away unimpressed by the automatic feel and awkward aesthetics. The chassis setup is serviceable but uninspired. The bike rides on standard telescopic forks with 4.2 inches of travel and a Pro-Link single rear shock offering 4.3 inches. Braking comes from a single front disc with a 2-piston caliper and a rear disc with a single piston caliper. Early models only offered anti-lock braking as an option, which felt like a misstep in a segment increasingly defined by rider safety tech. The seat height is a manageable 28.3 inches, making it friendly to newer or shorter riders, but at the cost of ground clearance and cornering capability. The long wheelbase and laid-back ergonomics result in slow steering and awkward parking lot maneuverability. At 479 pounds wet, the CTX isn't overly heavy, but it doesn't feel particularly agile either. What it did well, almost too well, was comfort and fuel efficiency. Riders regularly reported over 64 miles per gallon and praised the upright riding position for long-haul use. Forward-set controls and a cushy saddle made it easy on the lower back and shoulders. The low vibration and relaxed throttle response created a smooth, appliance-like ride. But that's also where the trouble began. It felt more like a transportation device than a motorcycle. The bars didn't transmit feedback. The engine didn't offer drama. The exhaust note didn't stir emotion. And in the world of cruisers, emotion matters. Styling was another dividing line. With its sharply angled fairing, integrated tank panels, and plastic-heavy construction, the CTX looked like something out of a science fiction film. It lacked the timeless cues that cruiser fans crave. No teardrop tank, no chrome accents, no raw edge. And while Honda may have intended to carve a new aesthetic lane, the execution left too many riders confused or uninterested. With a starting price of $7,699, the CTX 700N positioned itself above most entry-level machines. But for that price, it didn't deliver the performance, thrill, or classic looks that buyers in this category expect. Riders who wanted muscle looked elsewhere. Riders who wanted style never gave it a second glance. And even commuters found lighter, more practical alternatives that felt better suited to daily life. And last but not least, number 1. Yamaha VMax. It was built to shock, not to blend in. With radical proportions and brute force engineering, this machine arrived as one of the most outrageous muscle cruisers to ever hit the street. At its core is a 1,684 cubic centimeter V4 engine producing a staggering 200 horsepower and 123 pound-feet of torque. That kind of power made the VMax one of the most extreme production cruisers ever sold. But in the American market, where long-distance comfort, smooth handling, and rider usability matter just as much as speed, that performance quickly became more of a burden than a benefit. On paper, it looked like Yamaha had delivered something revolutionary. But in practice, the VMax felt more like a brute force experiment than a road-ready cruiser. Throttle response was aggressive, with torque coming in hard and fast, making city riding feel twitchy and highway rolls feel more like launches. It demanded rider attention every second. not in the immersive way a Harley or Indian does, but in a way that felt exhausting. The engine was a masterpiece of engineering, but one that rarely matched the relaxed rhythm American cruiser riders seek. The chassis was built around an aluminum frame to keep the weight down, but even so, the VMax tipped the scales at 683 pounds wet. That made it heavier than many touring cruisers, but without offering the comfort those bikes provide. Riders often noted the saddle was firm, the foot peg position awkward, and the ergonomics too neutral for long hauls. The bike's broad frame and 30-inch seat height didn't help either, especially when maneuvering at low speeds or parking on uneven terrain. And with no windscreen or fairing, freeway stretches turned into wind-beating endurance tests. Underneath the muscle, the bike carried a mix of sport and cruiser hardware. Suspension included a conventional telescopic front fork and a link-type monoshock in the rear. Both were adjustable, but the setup leaned more toward firmness than comfort. Braking was aggressive as well, with dual front discs using radial-mounted 4-piston calipers and a single rear disc. Later models added anti-lock braking, but earlier units lacked it entirely. A concerning omission on a bike with this level of raw power. Despite the performance equipment, there were no ride modes, no traction control, and no touring conveniences. It was all go with very little finesse. Styling was bold and unapologetic. With oversized scoops, exposed frame elements, and muscular bodywork, the VMax looked like something built for a movie chase scene. And for some riders, that was the appeal. It had presence. But for traditional cruiser fans in the US, the lack of chrome, classic lines, and laid-back visuals made it feel out of step with their expectations. It didn't have the heritage styling of a Road King or the rugged vibe of an Indian Chief. It was stuck between categories, and for many, that made it hard to place or justify. And then came the price. In its final years, the VMax commanded a base price of $17,999. That was higher than many fully loaded touring cruisers that offered integrated storage, wind protection, infotainment, and real long-haul usability. From overbuilt cruisers to bikes that just couldn't capture the right audience, these models didn't make it in America. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment below if you think any of these deserve a comeback or if you've seen one still kicking around.